Right, this process of extraction of honey begins with removal at the hive, and we cover the frames, and we've removed the bees, and we've got some frames of honey here that are sealed. Now, when honey is ready for harvesting, it needs to be sealed over, and you can see there with breaking the seal, the honey is released. There's two tools here. One is a scratcher, which we can use to break the surface of the comb, which is reasonably effective to take the cappings, wax off the top, or we can use a knife, which is an uncapping knife. This knife is used in this action, in the sawing action, and this removes the wax from the surface of the comb. It's a matter of cost and preference, which tool is used. The knife here is a cold knife, and in the tropics the combs and the honey are generally fairly warm, so we don't need to have to worry about preheating the combs for extraction. The honey will readily extract it at room temperature. Now the next process, the cappings and the honey are in this basket, and this is draining the honey from that wax, so we don't waste the honey. We save that honey, and then we also can retrieve that wax. The next step is to put this into the honey extractor, and that places in a basket which secures that frame. We then proceed with more. Now this is a frame that is difficult to uncap with a knife, and so therefore this scratcher is useful for finishing off the areas that the knife can't reach satisfactorily, to make sure all of the cells are open to release the maximum amount of honey. And we can with a comb like this, we can just work our way down and take the surface cappings off to release the honey. This is being placed in here until we get 4. Honey at this stage is ready to eat. This won't work out. We find in Fiji, most beekeepers use these. It's cheaper, and it's satisfactory to do that. To have a knife is a lot more expensive, but you still also require this as well. But you can do the whole job with this if that is all you've got. So these are now placed, one in each basket, which holds 4 frames. Now the principle of this machine is a centrifugal force. Spinning the frames will remove the honey and throw the honey from the combs. This particular extractor has a safety feature here where you must push the handle in to engage it to drive. Once it's engaged, then we can rotate the frames. Now this rotation process doesn't need to be extremely fast. And if you can look down in there, you can see the honey coming out on the wall of the extractor. This is particularly about 540 revs a minute this extractor should go, and that's about the speed we're doing now. So it's not important to spin it very fast, it's just a consistent spinning. You can see now I can release that and the handle's not flying around. The honey will take about 2 minutes to extract each side of the frames. When this comes to rest again, we can remove the frames, and the honey is removed from that side. We return it back and reverse it round. So the frame is taken out, turned round, so that the honey side is there, the empty side is inside now. So we quickly replace these. And we repeat the process. Engage the handle and spin the honey again. Again, the honey is coming out from the other side of the frame. So this extractor is doing one side and then the other side. This is a hand-operated plant, particularly designed for village use where they don't have power. A full frame of honey can yield up to about 2 kilos of honey. These are not particularly good frames of honey because of this time of the year, our honey production, this is not our honey production season. But generally, the frames are much fuller, and a full frame of honey can even hold as much as 2.5 kilos of honey. So from one of these frames, you can extract 2.5 kilos of honey. You can see now that the comb is empty, the honey has been removed. These combs now can go back to the hive, and the bees can repair, refill, and use them over and over again. So from here, we remove the frames again and place them back in our box. Ready for transporting back to the hives, and we repeat the process over until we've completed our honey extraction. The tools we keep in cold water, and that's a point we should emphasize here. When you finish this operation, wash all your equipment out with cold water. Let it soak in cold water. That will prevent fermentation starting. By using hot water, you can often activate the yeasts in the honey, and the residue of water and honey in the machine or in the container can set up fermentation. So it's best to just soak it in cold water, rinse it thoroughly, and then put the apparatus out in the sun, out in the bright sun, to dry out thoroughly before you bring it inside for storage. How to deal with our cappings. Our cappings wax now is in this basket, and the honey draining from that, you can either hang this like this overnight, or you can hurry it up by squeezing it out, by just winding it up until you get the honey removed, the last honey from the wax removed, and let that drain into the vase. So the honey in the cappings is still good quality honey, and you don't lose any honey if you allow it to drain. As this container fills, we then can drain the honey from here. This is a honey gate which is sealed, and the honey, we need to tip it forward slightly here to get it to run. This gate also can shut and tighten, which seals it from leakage. Right, we now take this honey and we go across to our storage tank. Now, our storage tank is a small tank. I'll just remove this lid. And again, we put another filter in the top. This is what is known as mutton cloth. It's a tubular material which is available quite readily in Fiji. So all we do is tie a knot in that end and we place it over this basket to form another filter. Once we have our filter in place, then we can take our honey and we can pour it down again through the filter, and that will go completely drained, and that again will give the honey a second filtration to make sure there's no particles of wax and things still in the honey, to get a good quality honey for the market. The same with the honey in the honey extractor. The process is the same here. As the honey extractor fills with honey, we can release the honey again into a bucket, and that honey also gets blended through here through the filtration. You'll notice in the honey there's particles of wax, little bits of wax that come off the frames when we're extracting, and this is what we need to get through our filter here to make sure all of those particles of wax still in the honey are removed to get a pure, clean honey. Once we've lowered the level of that sufficiently, then we can close that off and we can replace that with another bucket to catch any drips, and the same process with our bucket here. We can remove now, take back to this position, and with this again we can filter the remaining honey. So we now have pure honey being filtered, ready to eat. And this is one of the features of beekeeping in Fiji, is the producer is empowered all the way to the marketplace. He not only produces the product, he can extract the product, he can filter the product, and he can finally bottle the product to make it a saleable item. So to bottle it again is the same process, with being careful just to lift this gate a small amount. You can regulate the flow of honey coming from it. It's a good idea to have a damp cloth just to wipe up any drips, which invariably happens. We now have a bottle of honey on which we can put a sealed cap. These have got a safety seal in the cap, these bottles, so we know that they've not been tampered with in the marketplace, and therefore we can now with pride sell our bottle of honey. An important thing to remember is that when you filter the honey, when the honey goes through the filter, it also incorporates a certain amount of air in the honey. To remove that air, you need to leave this tank of honey to settle for about 2 to 3 days, preferably before you bottle it. In that time, the air will rise to the surface of the honey and form bubbles and foam. You bottle off the honey down to leaving always an inch in there. That honey that's left over can be run into a bulk container and then put through the extraction machine next time you extract honey and blend it back in and filter it out again. So you don't waste it, but you don't necessarily pack all of the honey in the tank at one time. You maintain the last amount of honey in a container for use for putting through the system next time you extract honey, and that way you can keep recycling and keep it going forever. So that's the important feature here, is to settle the honey for 2 or 3 days before you actually bottle the honey. If you're doing a lot of honey and your tank's over full, you can then store the honey. You can store the honey in a container such as this here. You can just run it off into larger containers. Fill them and bulk the honey off. Then when you want to pack the honey, you return these containers of honey one at a time to your tank, settle it for 2 days, bottle it, then tip the next one, settle it for 2 days and bottle it. And that way you'll have a nice product with nice clear top, no foam or froth around the top of the honey. You'll always have a nice presentable bottle of honey. The foam in many cases is only air bubbles, but it detracts from the marketplace. Customers look at it and think there's something wrong if they see white foam on the top. It may only just be air bubbles, but to prevent that, a simple system, you can do it with a simple system, this is what I'm trying to say, and get the same quality of honey that a big commercial plant would do, but you have to take the right steps. Now, to conclude, we're left with our wax still in the filter cloth. Most of the honey is drained, so what we can do with that is then place it in a bucket of water and just soak it in cold water and leave it there to soak for probably 24 hours. After 24 hours, the honey in the wax will have been absorbed into the water and you will be left with just the cappings wax. The cappings wax is pure beeswax, and it is a valuable byproduct of the beehive. So it can be melted in the village and made into candles, or it can be just sold to a beekeeping company as bulk wax. Now what we end up with here is particles of wax with the honey removed. So that's just particles of wax that's come from the comb. What we can do with that now is drop that into warm water and heat it until it turns to a liquid. But don't boil the water, just heat it gently and simmer the water until the wax particles will actually go into a liquid and form and disappear completely. In the process, the pieces of cocoon and other exterior matter in it will drop into the water and the wax will float on the top. You leave it then for 24 hours to go cold, and the wax will solidify in a cake on the top, and you'll end up being able to harvest that wax. Then you can reprocess and use that as well. So nothing is wasted in the process. We can save all of the honey and we can save the wax. All the products of the hive are marketable.